Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Josh Strife Hayes, and this is the story of our virtual world, a history of the MMORPG, Part 3. So far on this journey we've looked at gaming advancements and milestones from the West. Now we turn our attention eastward, to a country that will have a massive effect on the future of the MMORPG, Korea. The eastern countries of Korea, China and Japan have always been technologically advanced. Now, with the video game craze sweeping the world, they turn their attention to creating unparalleled gaming experiences. On the 5th of April 1996, the online game Baram released in Korea. It would come to be known to Western audiences as Nexus, Kingdom of the Winds. This game boasted gorgeous 16-bit graphics, highly detailed player and object sprites, and over-the-top animations and enemy designs. Baram was heavily inspired by the geography of 4th century Korea, focusing on the three main kingdoms of the time. This stylistic choice of having three distinct teams is likely to have kick-started the trend of games always having three factions. Up until now, online games had simply been places or spaces to exist in. In Baram, in a startling change to the established formula, there was a central storyline, and you were the main protagonist, playing online with other players who were also the protagonist in their story. Baram normalized the idea that each individual character was the main character in their own story, and all stories are happening together. So if you ever wondered why everyone in an MMORPG is the super special chosen one, the only person destined to save the world and restore balance, you can thank Baram, or Nexus, Kingdom of the Winds. The in-game display is now the standard players had come to expect. Inventory and tabs on the right, game on the left, chat and game text down to the bottom. It only takes two to start a pattern, and by now, this was a game design pattern fully accepted. The main issue with Baram is that it was only available in Korea. No other language localizations existed, and it would be a few years until a North American release would happen. Unfortunately for Baram, those few years would bring some major industry changes. 5 months after the Korean release of Baram, in September of 1996, the world would be introduced to what many believe to be the first real MMORPG. 1996 was a strange year. Tupac died, Take That split up, and the first cloned animal, Dolly the sheep, was born. Then in September, the world would be introduced to a new video game. Archetype Interactive was developing an online fantasy game. The design team of Steve Sellers, Mike Sellers, John Hank and Andrew Kermsey, supported by Chris Kermsey, Damian Schubert and 16 others, were inspired by the online mud Scepter of Goth and were determined to create the best online adventure game ever. Side note, John Hank went on to found gaming company Niantic, responsible for the global phenomenon Pokemon Go. While the small Archetype Interactive worked away, the project had drawn the attention of gaming publisher 3DO. 3DO, the game company behind the best-selling Lemmings, Battle Chess and Theme Park, had turned their sights to online gaming and were planning on taking every aspect they'd seen work and bringing it all together. They saw potential in Archetype games, and in June 1996, 3DO bought Archetype. The game would be released and known as Meridian 59, an online fantasy adventure game that would bring together all the successful aspects of its predecessors. It would be fantasy. It would have a fully rendered 3D world, and players would be able to walk around and explore the whole world. It had a minimap to the top right. It had items and objects in your inventory to the right, and it had chat at the bottom. Meridian 59 took every success from games past and combined them. Then it added some touches of its own. The heads-up display would have a player face graphic with horizontal bars displayed to the right, showing at a glance important statistics such as health or magic. The weapons a player was equipped with would be displayed to the left and right of the screen, as if being held in left and right hands. This viewpoint is still standard in first-person adventure games to this day. Then, one of the more important choices. Despite having the technology to sustain several thousand players on a world together, they made the choice to host several identical worlds and limit each to only several hundred players. This would prevent overpopulation and reduce the processing power needed by home computers, as all the player inputs would be sent from the server to the client's computers. This choice to split the player base down, placing each character onto an identical but population-limited world, was one of the most influential choices ever made, as this process is still used by gaming companies today. Meridian 59 had everything, and with 17,000 players joining the public beta test, they knew it would be a success. The only thing they didn't have was a genre. This game brought together every positive aspect we've seen so far, but the company was still unsure exactly how to market it. In meetings between 3DO and Archetype, one description was suggested: graphical mud. It didn't have the ring to it they wanted, so another was suggested: largen game. This wasn't it either, and eventually they settled on calling the game what it was: a massively multiplayer role-playing game. The online part of the acronym wasn't added yet, but this was close enough. Players weren't limited by an overall character level like Dungeons & Dragons, and instead trained each skill individually. Hit points were acquired by killing monsters, mana or magic points were increased by exploring the world and finding important locations. Players would be able to equip items and have their in-game avatar change to show the equipped item. They'd have their player name displayed above their head and to the left of whatever text they added to the universal chat box. There were quests to complete, bosses to hunt, and if you felt like it, other players to kill. With that, Meridian 59 released to the world the first official MMORPG, and it did not do well. Within 2 years of its release, it had been reviewed as no better than the second best, and had received 3 out of 5 stars. By 1999, its total sales were recorded as 14,359 units, which Game Daily described as minuscule. Despite poor in-store sales, 3DO reported the game a success, stating it had focused on online sales to move copies, and it had enough players paying its flat monthly fee to remain profitable. The monthly fee drew scorn from critics and reviewers, with many people saying it was an unsustainable business model and how customers would not be willing to pay for long periods of time. History has since proved these people wrong. In the years of its release, it would be a runner-up for Computer Gaming World's Role-Playing Game of the Year, but it was beaten by The Elder Scrolls Daggerfall. This feels lackluster. The first real 3D graphical MMORPG, and it didn't make the giant gaming splash everyone assumed it would. It released to poor sales, lack of fanfare, and unkind critical reviews. Developers knew how expensive it was to make and maintain these games, and anything less than perfect would ultimately lose money. Meridian 59 proved there was a place for online role-playing games, but the industry still had a way to go before it would find mass appeal. The next attempt would come only 3 months later, in December of 1996, and with it, even more advancements to the genre. With Meridian 59 3 months into its release, what could a game do to advance the genre? What core mechanics were left to establish? In December of 1996, Sierra Entertainment released The Realm Online. Sierra were an established company with many games to their name, including the RPG Ultima 2, puzzle game The Incredible Machine, and live-action interactive film Phantasmagoria. Sierra seemingly knew what they were doing when it came to games, and so threw their funding and endorsement behind The Realm Online. It was a medieval fantasy graphical mud and contained all the tropes we'd come to know and love by now. The Realm Online was a side-scrolling game. An area would be presented as a static image, and the player could click to move their avatar around the screen. Interacting with the in-game objects or NPCs required moving closer to them. This seems quite rudimentary compared to Meridian 59's full immersive 3D world, so what did The Realm Online bring to the genre? Well, The Realm Online was the first game to create a separate version of a small, specific area and allow players to explore it independently from the main world and other players. For example, if you and I were both playing a game and we both walked into a cave, when the cave loaded, we would both be in different versions of an identical cave, able to explore independently of each other. These separate versions of the same area would be known as instances, and through the use of instances, players or small groups of players would be able to finish quests together, fight enemies or explore together without the interference of other players, then return to a shared overworld or town. Instances allowed players to adventure without constant companionship or forced players to attempt certain challenges alone without their friends to help. The addition of instances would be the single biggest impact The Realm Online had on the genre, as other aspects of the game would be heavily criticised, including its incredibly unforgiving character creation process. If you didn't build your character correctly from the start, you would never be able to reach your maximum potential. The Realm Online joined the ranks of games fated to elevate others, and in only 1 month was challenged by the next big thing. Games require processing power, and early computers didn't have much of this to spare. Games like Meridian 59 boasted processor-intensive 3D environments, and The Realm Online had its, for the time, good graphical backgrounds. But what about the combat? For most of these early titles, combat was a slow affair, with some games even using turn-based battle systems, where players and enemies took it in turn to damage the other. The complexity of combat was limited by the remaining processing power available, so in January of 1997, developer Cipsoft focused on real-time, top-down combat with the release of Tibia. The fantastic thing about standardization is once you're familiar with the generally accepted standards of any given thing, you can recognize any other similar thing instantly. It's the reason why all video game first-person shooters agree left analog stick is move and right analog stick is look around. It's standardization. The online fantasy game was reaching a standard accepted look, and Tibia was able to release into that standard acceptance. Game to the left, inventory to the right, chat below. However, Tibia would allow you to see your character's equipped items at a glance. The heads-up display of worn equipment borrows from Dungeons & Dragons and covers 10 distinct equipped items, from your main hand weapon to headgear, even what backpack you're wearing. This always-on worn items display drove home Tibia's focus on combat. What you were wearing mattered. It wasn't simply a fashion choice, it was an essential part of your character. Tibia was a strong game, a very strong game. So strong, in fact, that it's still going today. They had a good-looking world, a deep combat system, and a user-friendly graphical display. Reviews at the time were critical of the steep learning curve, with frequent new player deaths and unforgiving, brutal enemies. However, this hardcore gameplay resonated with gamers at the time, and surviving in Tibia was a badge of honor, along with a fun time. Tibia had 4 playable classes, and once a player reached level 8, they'd be asked to pick a specific class. They were knights, paladins, druids, and sorcerers, the names all similar to their Dungeons & Dragons counterparts. Each class was able to damage the enemy and fight using different weapons. In early builds of the game, to cast a spell as a sorcerer, you had to type the spell name in manually every time. In later patches, this was changed to allow players to link a spell or ability to a single key press. This change, the ability to bind an in-game action to a single user-mapped key, would be the birth of hotkeys. Tibia would enjoy the spotlight for 8 months before something would come along to challenge it. And unfortunately for Tibia, it would be one hell of a challenge. Thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying this fantastic journey. If you want to support this series and channel, you can help out by simply liking, commenting, subscribing, or sharing. A big thank you to all my supporters on Patreon who have made this whole thing possible. If you'd like to become a patron, the links are in the description. See you in the next video, and as always, have a great day.